Welcome back to WWH. My name is Andrew Dreamer. Today's show comes to us from the golden age of horror. In one corner, a mansion filled with traps, ghosts, and enough psychological warfare to make anyone lose their mind. In the other corner, the legendary king of sinister charisma himself, Vincent Price. And believe me when I say this film may be over 60 years old, but it still knows how to work a crowd better than most modern horror films. There's something timeless about this movie. It doesn't rely on gore, jump scares every 30 seconds, or loud sound design to keep your attention. Instead, it uses atmosphere, mystery, and pure showmanship. This is a movie that understands horror should feel like stepping into a carnival attraction where you're never quite sure what's real and what's part of the act. So, WWH Universe, join me for this look at House on Haunted Hill on this episode of Ringside Review. Let's get straight into the tale of the tape for this one. House on Haunted Hill was released in 1959. It stars Vincent Price and was directed by William Castle, whose fingerprints are all over classic horror. This includes other films such as 13 Ghosts, The Tingler, and Homicidal, a very early slasher film that was sometimes viewed as a knockoff of Psycho. As for the subgenre, I feel haunted house horror is only fitting, though maybe not entirely accurate, which will make more sense as we get into the plot. Last but not least though, House on Haunted Hill comes in at a brisk 1 hour and 15 minutes. Before we enter this haunted house, be sure to body slam that subscribe button and dropkick that like button as hard as you possibly can to make sure you never miss out on any of the hard-hitting, chill-inducing 5-star matches we have here at WWH. It is bell time now, so grab your popcorn and make your way to your seat. Let's head down to the ring. House on Haunted Hill opens with wealthy and mysterious millionaire Frederick Loren, played by Vincent Price, inviting 5 complete strangers to spend the night inside a supposedly haunted mansion. The reward is simple. If they remain in the house until morning, each guest will receive $10,000. Loren's cold and theatrical demeanor immediately creates tension, especially because his relationship with his wife Annabelle appears openly hostile from the very beginning. The guests quickly learn that the house has a horrific history. Previous owners allegedly went insane, murders occurred within its walls, and several people died under mysterious circumstances. Loren even claims the house is born bad, suggesting it's evil, it lives inside the structure. As the guests settle in for the night, the mansion begins to feel less like a building and more like a trap waiting to close around them. Among the guests are Nora Manning, a nervous young woman who becomes the emotional center of the story, and Dr. David Trent, a psychiatrist who attempts to approach the night logically despite the increasingly bizarre events unfolding around them. Strange occurrences begin almost immediately. Chandeliers swing violently, eerie screams echo through empty rooms, and ghostly figures appear seemingly out of nowhere. One particularly disturbing apparition is an old woman floating silently through the darkness, a moment that remains one of the film's most iconic scenes. As fear spreads through the house, the guests begin turning against one another. Nobody knows who can be trusted, and the paranoia only intensifies when Loren reveals that guns have been hidden throughout the mansion for protection. The introduction of weapons transforms the situation from a ghost story into something far more dangerous, because now the guests are not only afraid of supernatural threats, but also of each other. The tension escalates further when Annabelle seemingly turns up dead, convincing everyone that the haunting may be real after all. Nora becomes increasingly terrified as she experiences visions and encounters that push her toward a mental breakdown. However, the film slowly begins revealing that many of the supernatural elements may actually be part of a carefully orchestrated scheme involving deception, manipulation, and greed. Eventually, the truth comes to light. Annabelle and Dr. David had secretly conspired together to murder Frederick and frame the events as supernatural occurrences. The fake ghosts, stage scares, and psychological manipulation, they were all designed to drive the guests into confusion while covering up the planned murder. Nora is then chased out of her room by Annabelle's ghost and follows Frederick into the basement. Nora shoots Frederick and then flees the basement, and following her escape, David then goes down into the basement to dissolve Frederick's remains in the vat of acid that's down there, only for the lights suddenly to go out, giving us what we get in terms of wrestling is a lights out moment. And I love those lights out moments. A lot of times it signals a huge return, but who could it be here? Annabelle enters the basement next to confirm that her husband is actually dead and that their plan has succeeded. A skeleton then rises up from that vat of acid, addresses her in Frederick's voice, and forces her into the acid herself. Frederick emerges from the shadows, revealing he is still alive and holding a puppeteer control unit that he has used to manipulate the skeleton. He also reveals that he knew of Annabelle and David's plot to kill him the entire time. Meanwhile, the others finally get down to the basement themselves. Nora obviously is shocked to see Frederick alive, but he tells her that he loaded her gun with blanks. He then explains that Annabelle and David had been plotting to kill him and that they died in the vat of acid. After all of this, Frederick adds that he is actually ready for justice to decide whether he's guilty or innocent. One of the other guests, however, is still convinced that the house is actually haunted. The film leaves just enough ambiguity surrounding the supernatural elements to maintain the eerie atmosphere even after the central mystery is solved. House on Haunted Hill closes on a fairly unsettling note, reminding the audience that whether the house was truly haunted or not almost doesn't matter anymore. The fear itself was real. Now, let's get to the match breakdown. One of the most fascinating things about House on Haunted Hill is how much of its legacy comes not just from the film itself, but from the brilliant showmanship surrounding its creation. This wasn't a huge studio production with a large budget or groundbreaking special effects. In many ways, the movie succeeded because the people behind it understood exactly how to maximize atmosphere, suspense, and audience excitement without needing enormous resources. At the center of it all was director William Castle, a filmmaker who approached horror less like traditional cinema and more like a live event. Castle was essentially the horror equivalent of a wrestling promoter. He knew audiences wanted thrills, surprises, and unforgettable experiences. More importantly, he knew presentation matters just as much as the movie itself. By the late 1950s, television had become a serious threat to movie theaters, and filmmakers were searching for ways to convince audiences to leave their homes and buy tickets. Castle's solution was pure spectacle. He turned horror movies into attractions. While many directors focused entirely on what happened on screen, Castle focused just as heavily on the crowd watching it. That mentality shaped House on Haunted Hill from the very beginning. Casting Vincent Price was one of the smartest decisions the production could have made. By 1959, Price was already becoming synonymous with horror, but this film helped cement the persona that would define much of his career. Elegant, sinister, charismatic, and darkly humorous all at once. Price brought a level of sophistication to the movie that elevated the material beyond a simple haunted house gimmick. Frederick Loren could have easily been played as a straightforward villain. But Price injects the character with wit and theatricality. He delivers dialogue with the confidence of someone controlling the entire room, almost like a really good wrestling heel who knows that the audience loves to hate him. What makes his performance so effective is that he never appears overly frightened by the events unfolding around him. Instead, he often seems amused by the chaos, which creates an unsettling feeling throughout the movie. Even when supernatural events occur, Price maintains this eerie calmness that makes viewers question whether he knows more than everyone else. The film simply would not have the same identity without him. Because the budget was relatively modest, the production relied heavily on lighting, set design, and camera work to create fear rather than expensive visual effects. Ironically, those limitations ended up becoming one of the movie's greatest strengths. The mansion itself feels oppressive and labyrinthine. It's filled with long hallways, dark staircases, hanging shadows, and strange rooms that seem disconnected from reality. The black and white cinematography adds tremendously to the atmosphere because it creates harsh contrasts between light and darkness. Entire sections of the screen disappear into shadow, forcing the audience to constantly search the frame for movement. This approach makes the movie feel dreamlike and disorienting. Instead of showing everything clearly, the film allows viewers' imaginations to do much of the work. That restraint is a huge reason why several scenes remain effective decades later. The famous ghostly old woman sequence is a perfect example, and this to me is actually the best high spot of the entire film. The effect itself is incredibly simple by modern standards, yet the scene still feels deeply unnerving because of the way it is staged and filmed. The silence, the unnatural movement, and the slow pacing make the moment linger in your mind far longer than many elaborate modern horror sequences may do. Of course, the most legendary aspect of the film's release had nothing to do with the movie itself, though. William Castle devised a theatrical gimmick called Emergo to accompany screenings of House on Haunted Hill. During a key moment near the climax of the film involving the skeleton on screen, theaters would release a fake plastic skeleton suspended on wires above the audience, making it appear as though the skeleton was flying through the theater itself. It was ridiculous, it was cheap, and audiences loved every damn minute of it. Sometimes even too much. And this is where the wrestling comparison becomes impossible to ignore. Castle understood crowd psychology the same way great wrestling promoters do. He knew horror fans wanted participation. They wanted to scream, laugh, react, and feel like part of the experience. Emergo transformed the movie from passive entertainment into an event people would talk about afterward. In many ways, Castle was ahead of his time. Modern horror marketing often revolves around immersive experiences, viral campaigns, and audience interaction, but Castle was doing this decades earlier with little more than creativity and showmanship. Even though House on Haunted Hill may seem simple compared to modern horror films, its influence can still be felt throughout the entire genre. The isolated mansion setting, the group of strangers trapped together, the blurred line between supernatural horror and human deception, and the psychological breakdown of the characters all became staples of haunted house storytelling. You can see the traces in countless films later, and even reality television concepts built around these sort of paranormal investigations. This stuff is everywhere. The idea of placing a group of people inside a dangerous environment and watching paranoia consume them has become one of horror's most enduring formulas. What's remarkable is how efficiently the film accomplishes all of this in only 75 minutes. There's very little filler. Every scare, conversation, and twist pushes the story forward. The movie understands exactly what kind of experience it wants to deliver and never overstays its welcome. More than 60 years later, House on Haunted Hill remains beloved not because it is the scariest movie ever made, but because it represents a style of horror filmmaking built entirely around entertainment. It's spooky without becoming oppressive, theatrical without becoming parody, and creepy without relying on excessive violence. Most importantly, the movie has personality. You can feel William Castle enjoying himself behind the camera, and you can feel Vincent Price relishing every line of dialogue. That sense of fun is infectious, and it's the reason that this film continues to connect with horror fans generation after generation. Like a great wrestling event, the film understands that audiences may forget individual moments over time, but they never forget how the experience made them feel. But having said all that, I do still need to point out some weak spots in the film as well. Like many films from the 1950s, some of the dialogue and performances outside of Vincent Price can feel a little stiff by modern standards. Certain twists are also fairly predictable today because so many later horror movies have borrowed from this film's structure. Again, these elements almost add to the experience though. Its simplicity is part of its charm. But how did all of these aspects factor into my rating? Let's find out and get to the final bell. House on Haunted Hill to me belongs in the upper mid-card. It's a very strong haunted house classic that still knows how to work the audience after all these years, but I want to hear from you. What are your thoughts? And by the way, if you're not familiar with my rating system, check out the post on the channel. Each rating will be posted and explained there. Once you do that, come back here and leave me a comment where you would place House on Haunted Hill on your match card. Now that we've talked about House on Haunted Hill, why don't you check out my last video? And you can do that by clicking the video that's appearing on your screen now. And remember, in the squared circle of horror, there are no countouts for nightmares. My name is Andrew Dreamer, and this is Wrestling with Horror.